Hi, I'm Darrin Peppard. Welcome to the Leaning into Leadership podcast, the podcast dedicated to today's hardworking leader. Join me every Sunday for leadership insight, inspiration, and a little pep talk to keep you rolling down your road to awesome. Welcome into episode 45 of the Leaning into Leadership podcast. A couple of weeks ago, I jumped into a mastermind that's hosted by Teach Better for school administrators, and the conversation we were having focused on actually the use of instructional coaches and their impact on improving instruction. As the conversation progressed, it kind of moved its way into the role the administrator has in the school of being the instructional leader. During that conversation, my guest on today's episode, Dr. Dan Kreiness, shared with me a video that he had created on his YouTube channel titled, "Administrators Are Not Instructional Leaders." Of course, I immediately took some time, watched that video, reached out to Dan because honestly, there were two pieces of research that he cited there that I had also cited in my dissertation. And he and I had a great conversation. It led to me writing a blog post. He has then talked more about it on his podcast, and we just felt that we had to take the conversation a step further. And that's what we're doing today on episode 45 of the Leaning into Leadership podcast. And let me tell you a little bit more about Dan Kreiness before we bring him on. Dan Kreiness is an instructional leader. He's a podcast host, an author, and speaker who constantly searches for the most effective ways to advance education and produce high student achievement. Dr. Kreiness has worked in education for over 16 years as a school administrator, an instructional coach, intervention specialist, and a classroom teacher while working in districts in the New York City metro area, in New York, and in Connecticut. Dr. Kreiness holds a doctorate degree in leadership and master's degrees in adolescent education and educational leadership. His original research and dissertation is called Transformational Leadership to Inspire Growth Mindset in Classroom Teachers. I'm telling you, this conversation with Dr. Kreiness was absolutely phenomenal. It could have gone on for hours, but we made sure it would fit in one episode. And we're going to get to that right after this. Leaders, your educators deserve to have a leader who believes in them, who supports them, and who lifts them up when they're down. Right now, they deserve that reminder that they are traveling their own road to awesome. On that road to awesome, we focus on the things we can control and we let go of the things we can't. On that road to awesome, we rise by lifting others, not by pushing each other down. And on that road to awesome, we change the world one conversation at a time. Leaders, I want to work with your schools. I want to work with you and your educators to lift them up, to honor the work they do, and to let them know they are not in this alone. Let's get together. Let's have a conversation. Let's get your teachers back on that road to awesome, to find that love, to find that clarity, and to walk in their purpose. Reach out to us at roadtoawesome.net for your opportunity to bring Road to Awesome to your school. And now, here we go with episode 45 of the Leaning into Leadership podcast with Dr. Dan Kreiness. I will see you on the other side. All right, Dan, welcome into the Leaning into Leadership podcast, man. Been looking forward to this conversation. How you doing today?
I'm good. We're recording on a Friday afternoon, so the weekend is here. It's been kind of a long week, and I was just telling you before we hit record, somewhat of a stressful week at school, but it's over now. We made it through, and it's the weekend, so we're doing all right.
Yeah, let's actually go there even before you do any kind of an introduction. You had mentioned that you guys were working on a quality review this week. So maybe for those who don't have that type of experience in their school district or in their state, just in a nutshell, what was that like this week?
Well, first off, if you don't know what the quality review process is or what it's like, imagine, you're probably an educator if you're listening to this and you know about teacher evaluations, but imagine a similar process only multiplied to evaluate the entire school and many, many aspects of that school. And there were classroom visits involved. There were meetings involved. There were meetings with students, meetings with parents. So like they wanted to involve all stakeholders. And it's stressful for teachers and for staff members for sure. I don't think the students were too stressed, to be honest with you, which is great. But for staff, it's really stressful. And we could probably go on for hours, and I don't know that that's where we want to head with this conversation too, about just the accountability. And what I really hate about processes like this is the compliance that it seems to assess more than anything, really.
Yeah. Listening to you describe it makes me think back when I was a high school principal in Wyoming, where our accreditation was done through the North Central accreditation process. And very much like that. You have the external review, and they're looking at different standards. And what you do is you spend 6 or 8 weeks just compiling all of these artifacts. And, really it's just you're proving what you're already doing. And yes, we could chase that for hours, but that really isn't what you and I plan to talk about today. So just really quick, Dan, for the folks who maybe don't know who you are, just a real quick bio, who you are, where you're coming from, those types of things.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. My name is Dr. Dan Kreiness. I am from New Fairfield, Connecticut, and I work in Norwalk, Connecticut as an instructional coach for digital learning. 17 years now in education, and I've held a lot of different roles, from classroom teacher and interventionist to instructional coach, administrator, back to instructional coach. I love what I do, and I think at this point, I love really pouring into teachers, which is why I really get fired up about coaching and being an instructional leader. And then aside from the work that I do in my district and in my school, I also create some content. I have the Leader of Learning podcast and blog and lots of different things I do with that brand YouTube channel. But I love doing that too, because it allows me to not only give back to and support the teachers that I work with in my school, but a broader, more global audience of educators as well.
I think that's wonderful too. And you mentioned your YouTube channel. I've watched quite a few of the videos that you have on there, and obviously you and I know each other in some other ways. I think we initially met through Teach Better's Administrator Mastermind, and then obviously we got to finally meet in person at the Teach Better conference back in October of 22. Let's touch base first on one of your videos that's just gotten a ton of views. And that's the one where you talk about why you left administration. I mean, you just referred to it. You were an instructional coach, became an administrator, went back to an instructional coach. Not a normal path. Not that matters. I mean, anymore, I don't think there's anything any close to normal. But what was kind of the gist behind that, and kind of what, I guess, was your thinking there?
Yeah. So I guess I'll start by saying that becoming an administrator, and in particular an assistant principal, was something that I always strived for. After about 15 years or so of being a teacher and a coach, I left for an administrative role that was actually a lot like coaching, but as an administrator. Things were kind of weird with that job, and I left that after not even a full year as well. Jumped back into an instructional coaching role, and then had the opportunity a little over a year ago, so it was prior to the 21-22 school year, to leave my district and become an assistant principal at a 6 through 12 middle high school. And there were lots of reasons that led me to only stay in that role for about 3 months, which I know seems like a very short amount of time. I still maintain that in 3 months of being an assistant principal at my school and former district, I probably saw more than some administrators do in 3 years. But there were a lot of reasons, and I'm not going to go into all of them here, just because some were financial and personal. But one of the biggest professional reasons why I chose to go back to the district and the role I was already in, which is the role I'm in now as an instructional coach, is because I just felt like, and I've told you this story before, but for your listeners and viewers, I felt like the odds were stacked against me so hard that I was not going to be able to be the kind of instructional leader that I wanted to be and that I was kind of used to being, and quite frankly, not to toot my own horn, starting to, I think, get really good at being. And so just to get a little more specific there, as an administrator, I didn't have a lot of support. And I'm not saying this to bash the school or the district, but at the time, so this is just a little more than a year ago now, or a little less than a year ago, I should say, we had 4 counselors, school counselors for the entire building, and they mainly only worked with our high school grades. So we didn't really have counseling support at the middle school level. We only had 1 full-time school psychologist and I think a couple of part-timers. And so basically everything stemming from, classroom teacher support, discipline issues, parent phone calls, everything came right to administration. And as a newcomer to that school and to that position, I just felt like I'm not going to actually be able to really make the kind of impact, instructionally speaking, that I wanted to make. And I think maybe there are administrators out there who are okay with that or have kind of just come to accept it. But I didn't want to come to accept it. That wasn't really good enough for me, I guess. And so I did. I kind of saw a way out, and that way was going back to something that I really did enjoy doing, and I still do. And so I got out and I went back to it.
Yeah, I think you touched on a couple of really important things there. Number one, focusing on doing something that you truly enjoy. I think all of us, when we step into administration, understand there are going to be some pieces that we have to take on that we don't necessarily want to or are going to enjoy as much. And certainly when you're the new kid on the block in an administrative role, for me, my first role as an assistant principal was discipline and attendance. I mean, that was what was next to my title, was assistant principal of discipline and attendance, which meant it was cookie cutter discipline constantly. I really had no opportunity to be an instructional leader, but I think I knew that going in with the title. Fortunately, my next assistant principal role, the title behind it was curriculum instruction and special programs, which meant I got to really be the instructional leader. To me, the biggest takeaway from what you just talked about goes back to sticking with what you're passionate about, and really with what the role of the administrator really needs to be and should be, and that's helping teachers grow. For me, as an administrator, I love being able to help teachers grow. As a building level principal, Dan, for me, I loved growing my assistant principals. I loved growing leaders. But that's why I do now what I do. And for you, obviously, it's that love of growing teachers. What's like maybe the most rewarding part of the process that you go through when you're working with teachers and coaching them to grow to be the best they can be?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I just wanted to touch on one thing that you were talking about, in terms of growing other leaders too. And I want to actually give a shout out. I've never done this publicly, but give a shout out to Dr. Edwin Casada, who is the superintendent at the district where I was an assistant principal, because one of the things that really stuck with me that he told us as we, because there were like a cohort of us who were new administrators in the district or new to principal positions in the district, and we went through some training sessions together, and the superintendent said, don't forget your number one responsibility is to instruction. And I always found that interesting that he said that, because I found it so hard to really focus on that aspect of the job. And I always felt like that was also kind of the biggest reason why I left, not to joke about it, but it was always interesting to me that really stood out among some of the advice that he gave us. But getting back to your question about supporting teachers, I love seeing teachers grow. You and I have talked a little bit about similar paths that we went on in terms of the research that we did for our doctorate work, our dissertations, and mine dealt a lot with dealing with and overcoming teacher resistance and what kind of leadership practices will help inspire a growth mindset. And so, a lot of people can't do what we do or won't do what we do, which is working with the adults, whether it be school leaders or school teachers. It's not for everyone. It's not easy. Sometimes, and we've heard this before, teachers don't make the best students because they're reluctant or resistant. Many people just want to work with the students in their classrooms, and that's not easy. I've made a shift. You made a shift in your career to not be in the classroom anymore, and it's just, again, like what you said a few minutes ago, it's just what you're passionate about. I'm passionate about working with those teachers who are reluctant and resistant. Again, it's not for everyone, but I like doing it. And just like classroom teachers, see that spark in a student who is a behavior problem or just didn't really seem engaged, or maybe an attendance problem, or for some reason you feel like you're not getting through to them, and then you finally do, and it's really rewarding. For me, I have the same thing when it comes to coaching. And whether it was earlier in my career when I was a literacy coach and working with the English, ELA teachers at my school, but especially now because a lot of teachers aren't in love with technology and digital learning, and they need a lot of help and support when it comes to blended learning and striking that balance between too much and too little technology. And I love helping them get there, seeing that spark when something really resonates with them, and really trying to, it sounds cliche, but like really actually trying to get them and their students more future ready.
No, that's super powerful. I love how you kind of touched on that. I want to dive into our dissertations now. I can't believe I just said that out loud, but I actually want to dive into our dissertations
without boring people too much, right?
Well, exactly. Yeah, we're not going to read them to you, folks. But I know we have some crossover in the studies that we had, even though I focused on principals and you focused on reluctant teachers. But before we go there a little bit, let's hit that just a little bit more with those reluctant teachers, with those ones who are a little bit resistant. You're right. I told every young administrator that I worked with, every administrative intern that I had, it's not the kids that are going to get you. It's going to be those challenging adults, because adult behaviors are adult behaviors for whatever reason. Also a topic we're not going to chase on today's show. But what's maybe like one or two of those things? You just had a whole lot of people's ears perk up when you said, working with the reluctant teachers. Give them a strategy or two. What works to help get you in the door?
I have to give a shout out to someone who I follow on YouTube. He's built a brand around not just creating content, but specifically creating online courses. His name is Graham Cochran. He said something in a video that he produced 2 years ago, but I just saw it for the first time. He said, "You're not selling information, you're selling transformation." And I guess to put that in, to put a spin on it that brings it back to our work as educators and as leaders, it's more like you're supporting people by not just giving them information, but providing a transformation. And so the idea is not to just tell teachers what to do. And as a coach or even a school leader, it's bad practice really to go in thinking that you have all the answers, or at least leading people to believe that you think you have all the answers. It's so much more powerful to let them seek out answers for themselves, to intrinsically be motivated and inspired to want to change, to want to try something new. I've talked a lot before with other school leaders about this idea of taking risks. Like, people, it's education. It's not life or death. If you go out on a limb and take a risk, what's the worst that can happen? And so I think I hope I answered your question correctly. But just that idea of trying to provide more transformation than information. And then, like I said, just trying to intrinsically inspire, whether it be other leaders, teachers, or students, to want to grow and change and get better, and not because you're telling them to, or you're giving them all the information and, basically just doing their jobs for them, but really inspiring them to want to do it.
We will return to the Leaning into Leadership podcast in just a moment. But first, let me ask you a question. Have you ever said to yourself, man, I should write a book? Well, if you have, then let me ask you another question. What's holding you back? What keeps you from taking the step that moves you from, I have an idea about a book, to, I am a published author? From experience, I would bet it's probably you're wondering who would even want to read a book that I wrote. Maybe you're questioning the idea. Is it unique enough? Is it valid enough? Is it good enough to be a book worthy of having published? Hey, as a best-selling author myself, I can tell you most writers have had the exact same feelings at some point in time during their writing journey. Here at Road to Awesome, we believe in cultivating leaders by elevating voices and promoting positivity. And a part of that work is publishing books for educators by educators. Go to roadtoawesome.net and hit the Contact Us button to set up a free, no obligation conversation about your book idea. Hey, educators, we've all had incredible experiences. We all have amazing stories, and every one of them deserves to be told. Go to roadtoawesome.net, hit the Contact Us button. Let's have that conversation about your book idea. And now, back to the Leaning into Leadership podcast. As leaders, one of the most important things we could do to get those doors opened up is to develop a culture where taking a risk is acceptable. There's a big difference. And I don't remember if you said this before or after we hit the record button, but we're definitely going to go down this rabbit hole. And that's the difference between, those cultures of taking risk, those cultures of innovation, and those cultures of compliance. Actually, now I do remember you talked about compliance when talking about the whole whole
quality review
evaluation, mm-hmm. Right? Yeah, but and to me, I've said this thousands of times. To me, compliance is the enemy of innovation. So, again, I think what I'm hearing you say is, as leaders, if we just create environments and cultures where it's okay to take a risk without fear of repercussion, that helps open up the door. Am I capturing that right?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And I've seen it with students, probably more than teachers. I helped inspire a teacher to bring Genius Hour projects into the classroom a handful of years ago. And the way that we pitched it to students was, we asked them, like, how often is it that you are the one to actually choose what you're going to learn about in your classes? And of course, none of them said, oh yeah, I've done that before. They were like, what? You can't be serious. Like, we've never done that. So, why not do that with teachers too? I know you mentioned compliance again. I think we talked about that before we hit record, but yeah, it's so stifling to think that you have to, that you're on a scope and sequence where you have to get certain things done in a certain order and at a certain time, and you can't take too much time because then you veer off course and you never get back and you can't finish things on time. But if there is any flexibility and creativity and autonomy that teachers can have in the classrooms with their students to, at the very least, unlock some of their creativity. I was gonna say unlock their potential, but that, like,
I was kind of waiting for you to, yeah. Get a little bit of Brandon Beck dropped in here. All right, there we go.
Shout out to Dr. Brandon Beck. We're gonna unlock their unlimited potential in the classroom. And I am a big proponent of student content creation. It's something that I'm really passionate about myself in terms of the content that I create, and I love seeing students do that and especially that we're trying to give them more opportunities to not just create content that only their teacher or maybe other students in the class will see, but really publish it to a more broader or global audience. And I don't know if that answers your question too much, but that's a lot of what I like to see. And when I talk about teachers taking risks, and I guess I mean students as well, it goes for the leaders too. If there are opportunities for school and district leaders to bring more of that into the classrooms in their schools and their districts, like I'm urging you, I'm begging you, I really feel like students not only need it, I feel like they're ready for it. I feel like students are ready for those kind of opportunities more than the educators are. And if we're not meeting them where they're at, I think we're going to lose them. And I'm guessing you've seen examples of that as well over the years. Like sometimes you lose students because they're just not into it. But if we can, if we can give those opportunities to them, I really think it'll benefit everyone, teachers, students, everyone.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And I think the same thing is true at that staff level. You know, if we're giving opportunities for staff to learn at their own pace, again, if as leaders we're not meeting our staff where they are, how in the world can we look them in the eye and say you need to meet your kids where they are? I mean, let's just be straight about that. You know, the one size fits all doesn't fit in a classroom, and it no longer fits with professional development for staff, and neither does it for leaders, to be honest with you. I mean, that's a big part of why, you know, now I'm doing the work I'm doing with coaching leaders and leadership teams. Everything has to be customized because everybody is at a different place. And if we're going to really do our job the right way and really have an impact, really, as I love to say, change the world one conversation at a time, we got to be willing to look at where everybody is along that continuum. So with that, I'm going to jump back and forward all at the same time to the point that we were kind of getting to with, you know, you having your dissertation focusing on overcoming teacher resistance. My dissertation was focused on the perceptions that early career principals had of their own skills specific to organizational management and instructional leadership. The key elements here are going to be instructional leadership that we want to talk about. So I'm going to go back to your YouTube channel. And on your YouTube channel, there's a great video. You shared it with me a little over a week ago about our principals, or our administrators, I think is the title you use in there. Are administrators really instructional leaders? Talk about the motivation behind it, and then let's dive into this conversation because it's such a great conversation.
Yeah, I'd be lying if I said that my experience as a school administrator and leaving that position to go back to being an instructional coach didn't have a lot to do with creating that content. But frankly, you know, and I know that you've seen the same research out there, but there's research that says that only about 12% of the time that school administrators, principals spend is in that area of instructional leadership. So you think about 88% of the rest of their time is doing what? It's some of the stuff that we've already talked about. It's fielding phone calls and dealing with student discipline, lots of meetings. It's a lot of things that take administrators away from that boots on the ground type work that would really keep them grounded and more knowledgeable of what's really happening in classrooms. And then if you take that 12% of the time that's actually spent on instructional leadership, only a fraction of that is spent doing what I would call like heavy instructional leadership. We call it in the instructional coaching world, we call it heavy coaching versus light coaching. Sometimes principals do light instructional leadership. They think that getting out of their office and being visible is instructional leadership. Just being in classrooms is enough, and it's not. And the reason why, we've already said it, is compliance. What they're actually doing is checking up on things. They're checking up on students. They're checking up on teachers. Why? They want to see if they're doing the right thing. They want to know what they're doing, which I think in some ways is a sound coaching practice. It's a sound leadership practice. but not if it's only a fraction of your time, and not if it's not really targeted and like laser focused on some aspect of school culture, instruction, whatever. So you got 12% of a school administrator time spent on instructional leadership, and only part of that time is that heavy leadership. What does that involve? Actually meeting with teachers, whether it's through the evaluation process or not, to really provide support and feedback, which I think is something that is really missed in instructional leadership in general, whether it's coming from administrators or not, maybe, coaches too. And really letting them know, again, meeting them where they're at, right? Talking to them openly and honestly about where they're at and where they'd like to go. And it's just not done enough by school leaders. And I don't want anyone listening or watching this to be insulted. I'm not talking about you necessarily, but overall, based on research and based on personal experience as well over 17 years of my career, I just see in so many cases that administrators, principals, and assistant principals especially, just don't have the opportunities enough to really be what you would call an instructional leader.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's not that they don't want to be. I think that's a very important statement here. It's not that principals and assistant principals don't want to be instructional leaders. I don't think anybody ever signed up to be an administrator because they love going to meetings. Nobody ever said, I want to do that. Nobody said, hey, I can't wait to do discipline 9 hours a day. Nobody wants to do that. The truth is, administrators want to be in classrooms. They want to be sitting down and having conversations with teachers around instructional strategies that are working, around maybe some things that, they see as the outside observer of, hey, have you thought about this? Or, help me, a little bit with what you were thinking with this particular choice. I thought it was a great choice. I'm just curious why you selected this particular strategy, or, maybe you saw this or maybe you saw that, whatever. It's having those conversations. That's really where that instructional leadership comes in. And I mean, I definitely have some tips on that. We're going to get to that in a couple of minutes from both of us on how administrators can actually go from that 12% up to, maybe a lot higher percentage of their time being focused on the instructional leadership. Mm-hmm. But let's dig just a little bit deeper in this particular area. What were some of the things in your time as a school administrator? You kind of touched on a few, but what were a couple of those things that just really hampered your ability to get into classrooms, and not just get into classrooms? Because let me make this statement really quick. If administrators are just going into classrooms and they think just, going and doing this, casual walkthrough thing without feedback, without sitting and having a conversation, checking boxes and sticking them in a mailbox is not feedback. Well, it is, but it's not very good. If we're not doing that and having the intentional conversations after that, it's really not instructional leadership. Yeah, it counts in the 12%, but I don't think it's very good. What were the things that kept you from getting out and being able to do the heavy instructional leadership that you talked about?
I mean, first and foremost, by far, was student discipline. And I would find myself, so let me take you back a little bit over a year. Believe it or not, we're still only about a year removed from still doing temperature checks and going through some COVID protocols. So my day as an assistant principal would start.
Every administrator in the entire world just shuddered when you said that, by the way.
Like, I know, remember that? It sometimes now maybe it seems like it's a while ago, but it was just last year. I was still scanning kids' temperatures on the way into school. So my day would start with our students lined up to get their temperatures scanned and wait to enter the building. And sometimes there would be discipline issues that would happen before school as kids were online waiting to get their temperature scanned. And I knew the pattern was created early on last year where pretty much once I got into the school building, almost every day there will already be some discipline issues waiting for me. And I did lunch duty, and then after lunch duty, there'd always be some discipline issues that I'd have to deal with. That definitely sucked up a lot of my time. And as I've mentioned before, just not a lot of support there when it came to whether it be school counselors or other support staff to help manage that a little bit better. There were some meetings, but it was a lot of student discipline. And the other thing too, and I didn't necessarily get into this too much, but due to a bit of a certification issue, I wasn't actually, during the time that I was an assistant principal, I wasn't yet able to actually evaluate teachers, which was really disappointing because I felt like that could have been an opportunity for me to more formally say, you know what, like you were saying before, Darrin, I got to leave the student discipline aside for now. The school's not on fire. Let me, finish out my time, spend some time in this classroom, do my evaluation, whatever. But the rest of the stuff's got to wait. I wasn't afforded that luxury. Otherwise, things might have been a little different. But I wanted to kind of take that and run with it for a second, because when I was an administrator prior, and I did have evaluative power, I started to, and I don't want to claim to be the expert. I only did this for about a year, but I really felt like I started to get pretty good at using the evaluation process with teachers as an opportunity to kind of bring forward my instructional coaching abilities and to actually start to really practice what I preach in terms of being a school administrator who is an instructional leader. So there was a time in my career where I was doing that, and I think getting pretty good at it. And so I think to answer your overall question, and I believe you asked this in your blog post and kind of response to my content, should school administrators be instructional leaders, and are there times when they can be, despite all the things that are on their plate and everything that takes them away from it? 100%. And even if you can't find a lot of time to do it, there are opportunities for you to do it. And I think the evaluation process should be one of them. So taking the opportunity to use the evaluation as not a compliance system where you have to catch people doing right or wrong, but as an opportunity to really allow them the chance to, like we said already, be intrinsically motivated and inspired to want to grow in their practice. That's a huge opportunity that, I'm just going to say it, is wasted in a lot of cases with a lot of school administrators when they just don't necessarily see that kind of opportunity. It's more of what you said, where it's checking boxes, right? It's feedback, but it's not really good feedback.
Yeah. So I want to just build on that a little bit. So, obviously, I coach quite a few people, and, I've had a lot of conversations with administrators, not only through this work, but then also, having been a high school principal, having been a superintendent. And I think sometimes as administrators, and I mean, push back if you feel differently, I'm totally cool with that. I think that there are those times where a little bit of imposter syndrome will kick in. And I don't know, actually, let me ask you this question really quick, and then I'll continue my thought. Prior to going into instructional coaching and that type of stuff, what was it that you taught? What grade level, what content, what was your subject area? So
I've always been at the middle school level. Most of my teaching expertise and experience was at the 8th grade level as an ELA teacher. But I also did some intervention work and I've kind of worked with all 3 middle school grades, but most of my experience as a classroom teacher, as an ELA teacher.
Yeah, so that's perfect. So I'm going to just kind of build from there. So middle school teacher, let's say I was a middle school teacher, but I also taught at the high school level. But maybe there's an administrator who, taught middle school, maybe 6th grade. Now they're at a high school level, and one of the teachers they're evaluating is teaching honors or AP calculus, and there's a little bit of intimidation factor there. Maybe the administrator was a physical education teacher, a special education teacher, a non-core subject area teacher, an art teacher. Sometimes I think, and again, I'm speculating here because I was a middle and high school science teacher. So yes, I was in, quote, a core area. First off, I don't believe that that's a limiting factor, but I do think people perceive it as a limiting factor. And maybe there is a little bit of confidence of, how do I go and evaluate, well, I'll flip it over. High school science guy, how do I go and evaluate a band instructor? Yes, great teaching is great teaching, but for me, there were times where band, drama, industrial arts, I'm not going to tell them how to, handle small engine repair, but I should be able to go in with the confidence around good instruction, and I can help with instructional strategies. I think I went a little bit off track on my point, but I'm wondering, my question for you is, do you think that there are some of those imposter syndrome pieces that climb in for some administrators? For you as a middle school language arts teacher, did you feel any of that, or am I just way off base? Because it is a Friday afternoon. Who knows?
I think it's a great point. I would say I didn't feel as much of that imposter syndrome as an administrator as I did when I was first an instructional coach. But I could totally see that because I did feel it. It's funny you brought up the band thing. I'm technically certified to teach music too. So that's actually a subject area that I would feel confident in terms of supporting music teachers as well as ELA teachers, of course. But yeah, when I first became an instructional coach and I was coaching teachers in all content areas, I of course had that. And I've talked about it a lot. As a matter of fact, I've created other YouTube videos too around what imposter syndrome is and ways to overcome it. Little shout out for my YouTube channel again. Look me up, Dr. Dan Kreiness on YouTube. But definitely, given the imposter syndrome that I felt early on as a coach, like you said, having to coach teachers, support teachers in all content areas when my expertise and experience is only in one or maybe two, it is tough. It's something that I haven't thought a ton about, to be honest with you, in terms of school administrators, because I didn't necessarily feel that way when I first became an administrator. But I can, like I said, remember very much that I felt that way a lot as a new coach. And so I would 100% at this point agree that as a new administrator, people might feel like an imposter when it comes to, who am I that my experience has been in whatever subject it's been in my entire career, and now I got to work with teachers in other subjects. And you said like good instruction is good instruction, but I don't know that necessarily solves the problem of like, well, what are you going to do about your imposter syndrome? Right. Good instruction, but how are you going to overcome the fact that you're feeling really awkward about working with a family and consumer science teacher who teaches like baking, and you're like, I don't cook, I don't bake, like how am I gonna? But again, I really
the food's good, must have been a good lesson, right?
But I don't know. I can't stress enough again the importance of appealing to the teacher through that evaluation process, through that kind of instructional leadership and coaching, to basically partner with them versus just evaluating them and just looking for that compliance, but like learn from them as well. And I don't know, that's like the lifelong learner in me. Just I'm always looking for learning opportunities and experiences. And it's like, if I don't know a subject area well enough, that doesn't mean I can't support someone as an instructional leader, but it does mean that I would love to learn more about it. And we could definitely delve into what worked and what didn't in your classroom, even if I don't know the subject matter nearly as well as you do. That's definitely something that we could do. So I agree with you. I think, yes, it's real that imposter syndrome does exist or can exist, but there are definitely ways to overcome it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you just hit it on the head. You just absolutely, that's the biggest gold nugget so far in this episode is I don't have to know the subject area well. And that's probably one of the biggest limiting factors actually for administrators is feeling like, well, if I'm going to evaluate or give feedback, I need to know this really, really well. But that's not necessarily true. I mean, a great coach is going to give feedback on what they see and ask good questions. And when we flip the paradigm of evaluation truly into more of a coaching type of thing versus a gotcha type of thing, all of a sudden I don't understand this particular piece of calculus. Well, in truth, I don't understand any bit of calculus. That doesn't matter. I can give feedback on, a strategy or a move or a decision that was made during the class and just simply ask a question and we can learn together. I think that's absolutely huge.
I have an example to share.
Go ahead.
I'm a pretty big sports fan, not necessarily basketball, but in situations like this, I think about Eric Spoelstra, who I think he's still the coach. He became the head coach of the Miami Heat back in the days when LeBron James was on the team and Dwayne Wade and I think Chris Bosh too.
Yep.
And Eric Spoelstra, to my knowledge, my understanding, but prior to becoming a head coach, was some kind of coordinator in that in the Miami Heat franchise, to where he led the videotape room. Like when players would watch videotape back or coaches would use videotape to study their opponents and things, like he ran that aspect of the team. But then he started actually running the team. And here's my point. Eric Spoelstra, I don't think ever played in the NBA. And he now had to lead not only some of the top performing individuals in the NBA at that time, but literally some all-time great players. I mean, LeBron is arguably one of, if not the best player ever. Dwayne Wade was pretty darn good. And here's the thing. I believe that none of them at that point in their careers had won a championship. I could be wrong.
I think you're correct.
When Spoelstra took over, they won like right away. And I think about that, and I've thought about that throughout my career too. When this topic specifically comes up, you don't have to know everything as a leader. And you know what? There are people that you're going to lead who are better teachers than you were when you were in the classroom, and they probably know more about their subject or even the one that you taught more than you. So, understanding that, I think, will help lose that imposter syndrome to a degree, but also just understanding like everyone could use a coach, even world-class athletes. And those coaches, like you said, don't have to know everything, don't have to be as experienced or as talented, but they have to know, just like I need to know as an instructional coach, hopefully, or an administrator as an instructional leader, just needs to know how to push the right buttons and how to really tap into, as we said before, like meeting people where they're at, tap into their strengths and weaknesses and pull that out of them, pull that greatness out of them, pull that desire to want to learn more and grow out of them. So that's my little example, my story that I always think about when it comes to like coaching and supporting people who are in, teach other subject areas, maybe better. Like, I think I was a pretty good classroom teacher. I know better teachers. I'll be honest. There were definitely better teachers. There were probably teachers who worked harder, right? Probably teachers who built better relationships with their students, although I think I was really good at that. But that doesn't stop me from trying to work with other teachers and get them better, So I think at the end of the day, whether it's instructional coaching or instructional leadership, it's really, really important to keep in mind.
Yeah, coaching is, to me, one of the most important things. I've told my coaching story before here on the podcast, so I won't really dig into that. But, when you have that person who can provide that third point perspective, that, just a little bit of a different lens on what's happening, the professional athletes are a great example. I mean, you think about, Roger Federer just retired, and I'm going to tell you, I don't even know if it's an argument, other than maybe Serena Williams, who also just retired, two all-time great tennis players. I will tell you, they would mop the court with their coaches. It was not that their coaches were better than them. That had nothing to do with it. Coaches understood the game extremely well, but they understood their athlete extremely well. They knew, like you said, which buttons to push, where to leverage, where to encourage, where to guide, and to be able to just have honest conversations about, well, here's what I see. I'm wondering about what are you trying to accomplish here? What are you thinking about that? If we do that when we're coaching our teachers, that's an incredibly powerful thing. And I'm going to take it one step further, not only because it's the work I do, but because it transformed me. We have to be doing this with leaders too. If we don't have coaches for our leaders, if as a superintendent you don't have a coach, why not? If as a principal you don't have a coach, why not? You want to hit that highest level of performance? The coach is what gets you there. Now, that was a little bit of a rant on my end, but I just believe in coaching that much. And you said everybody can benefit from a coach, so you lit the fuse. I'm just going to say this one's on you, Dan.
No, listen, I just said before too that, even through like an evaluation process, both parties can learn a lot. Like I'm taking things out of this conversation as well as the other conversations we've had of late, one on my podcast and a couple of side conversations. I keep going back to that advice that I've heard recently about it's not about selling the information, it's about the transformation. So, if coaches or leaders don't feel like they have enough information, that could make them feel that imposter syndrome, feel inferior, right? But understanding that it's more about that transformation, getting that teacher to grow. Like if you grow through the process, it's great too. Maybe you can learn some things, but getting them to learn and grow and transform is ultimately, that's the goal.
That's just awesome. I love that so much. So let's dive into the final question here on the Leaning into Leadership podcast. The same question I ask every guest here on the podcast. You've hit a whole lot of things here, but Dan, let's just go right at it. How right now are you leaning into leadership?
So right now I'm leaning into leadership by, honestly, like I said before, really working with, I guess I do a lot of different things, but I'm really trying to, I think Darrin, we're really similar with this too, but to really try and inspire other educators to realize their leadership potential. It's so much of what I do in my work as a podcaster and content creator, but it's work that I really enjoy doing in my school too. Basically letting anyone know that they're a leader. I end every one of my podcast episodes by saying that no matter who you are or where you are, you're a leader of learning. And I mean that. I call it label-less leadership because you're a school leader, of course you're a leader. You're an instructional coach, of course you're a leader. You're a classroom teacher, of course you're a leader. You're leading students, you're leading the next generation of leaders. And I think you and I have talked about this before too. Ultimately, I would like to think that I'm leaning into leadership by embodying this, but also inspiring this in others to say that you're a leader if you're creating other leaders, right? And so that work is not the easiest work either, but the more that you can try and do that, then I think the better off we're all going to be, because it's multiplying your own impact into others and then more. And so it's like a snowball effect, hopefully, after that. But I truly believe, again, not to sound too cliche, that leaning into leadership for me means trying to create other leaders, and so they can create more leaders, and I don't take that work lightly either. I really do go into my day-to-day job, my day-to-day work, my day job, with that in mind, and certainly with all of the side hustle stuff that I do, the podcast, the YouTube channel. Yeah. That's so much of what I like to preach and really tout in those different avenues.
That's fantastic, man. Thanks so much for that. How can people get in touch with you if they want to reach out and just continue the conversation?
I appreciate that a lot. The website is leaderoflearning.com. That's where the podcast, the blog, the online courses, everything is there. YouTube channel you can find on there as well as subscribing to my email newsletter. As far as social media goes, I'm pretty much at Dr. Kreiness everywhere. So it's at Dr_Kreiness, which has the E before the I, and it's not after C. It always trips people up, but it's Kreiness, and you can see that right there. Anyway, I'm pretty much at Dr. Kreiness, Dr_Kreiness everywhere.
I'll put all of that stuff in the show notes too, folks, so it's easy for you to find. And you can look all you want. You won't find a C in Kreiness. So you can just go right from there. Dan, thanks so much for joining me on the Leaning into Leadership podcast, man. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks so much.
Grateful I had that conversation with Dr. Kreiness and was able to share it with each of you. When I reflect back on the first time I watched that YouTube video that he shared, that administrators are not instructional leaders, I went in with this mindset that, I'm going to prove him wrong. And the more I watched and the more that I really paid attention to what Dan was saying, the more I agreed with him. It's not that school leaders don't want to be instructional leaders. It's that there's so many demands on their time that it makes it very difficult for them to be the instructional leaders that they want to be. So thank you so much, Dan, for coming on, for talking a little bit more about that. We'll have to have Dr. Kreiness back on the show a little bit later on to maybe take that conversation a little bit further. But now it's time for a pep talk. And in today's pep talk, I want to take that conversation just a little bit further and talk about how, as school leaders, we can really get to, or at least close the gap on being the instructional leaders that we want to be. Folks, it all comes back to being intentional. What you focus on, what you believe in, what you really, truly value is what you're going to spend your time on. It's easy to get pulled into firefighter mode. There's always a crisis waiting for you. The question is, are you going to wait for the crisis, or are you going to take control of your time and take control of the work that you do? Let me give you 4 things that you can do right now as you go into your coming week or in the week you're currently in to start spending more time being an instructional leader. Number 1, make it a priority. If it is a priority, if it's something you truly, truly believe in and want to make happen, you'll find the time, and do so by putting it on your calendar. Not just the evaluations, not just the walkthroughs, but those deep conversations around feedback from when you do evaluations and walkthroughs. Number 2, ensure that others know that it's your priority. And specifically, I'm talking about the other folks who work in the office with you. Whether that's your secretaries, your counselor, your assistant principals, they need to know that your priority is being in the classrooms. In other words, train them around how and when to interrupt you and when to leave you alone. Just because a kid comes in the office does not mean everything needs to stop and you come running back in. Work on a system so that there's great communication and great understanding around your priorities so you can focus on being the instructional leader first. Number 3, do the heavy coaching. I love how Dr. Kreiness talked about this, the difference between light coaching and heavy coaching. The heavy coaching is not about compliance. It's about getting in deep, talking about instructional strategies, talking about standards, talking about the art and the science of teaching with your teachers. Learn alongside them, which takes us to number 4, and that's, hey, be vulnerable. Be willing to learn with your teachers. Just because you're the principal, or just because you're the superintendent or assistant superintendent or whatever title you hold, that doesn't mean you have to know more than them. It just simply means you are the person who's going to set aside the time to coach, guide, grow, and support them. Spend your time doing those 4 things, and you can become the instructional leader that you want to be. Thank you so much for joining us on this week's episode of the Leaning into Leadership podcast. Get out there and have a road to awesome week. Thank you for listening to the Leaning into Leadership podcast, brought to you by Road to Awesome. Don't forget, click subscribe, give a review, and share this with somebody who might also enjoy leaning into leadership.